Oh, it's live on YouTube. That's impressive. I didn't know you could do that.
I didn't either until a week ago when we usually use Vimeo for our streaming service. And they were down on a Sunday. So we did Zoom church. We weren't expecting to do Zoom church, and I figured out how to make it stream. So every week I learned something new. It's pretty cool. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we should begin. If anybody else joins us, that's fine. And I'm sure that folks who couldn't make it home from work will watch the video later. The advantage of digital everything. But some of you were in on the conversations over the summer. I think that was the summer or the spring, when we were in our Benedict book group. And we got to a section when the rule of Benedict was really urging us to look at the brokenness of the world and the structures of the world that are broken and do something about it. So we started, Peggy, you were the first person who started talking about the JBS meatpacking plant workers, and then you were, and then we just started learning about that and trying to advocate for some of them where they were having an outbreak. And then we learned about refugees, and we learned about Lutheran Family Services, and we wanted to do some more. So that's how I figured out who Alex is and reached out, and she agreed to do this presentation for us. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. If this can totally be an interactive type of lesson, if anybody has questions, I mean, I really know the Greeley refugee population well, so we can always relate stuff back to them. And if you have questions throughout the whole time, feel free to yell and interrupt me, or you guys, there's a little chat box on the side. I'm sure Rev Krista can watch it and let me know if anybody's asking questions. Don't be afraid to interrupt me though, if you just want to shout out at something. I can get a little wordy, so I don't mind at all. I have a little presentation that I'll share with you guys right now. All right. Okay, so again, my name is Alex. I work at Lutheran Family Services Rocky Mountains in the Refugee and Asylee Programs office in Greeley. So I'm the case and community coordinator, which means I have kind of a two-part job. So my community part of my job means I'm working with our volunteers and our interns. And I'm also working with churches and setting up the community relations that relate back to our refugee population and kind of tie us into the community. The other side of my job, I am the case coordinator, which means I do the big intakes for all of our cases, and then I kind of connect them outward to different case managers, different services, stuff like that. We are practicing a new type of case management, which can be called motivational interviewing, also known as like coaching technique. So basically, we're trying to personalize all of our case management to the specific client themselves rather than doing checklist type case management. So it's just kind of a really fun experience that I get to do alongside the client of learning what they specifically want their life to look like and trying to help them form it to be there, which is a very new concept for refugees who have been in survival mode for many, many years. So I get to do some fun things throughout my day. Lutheran Family Services, we have been around since 1975. The first office was in Denver, and it opened up to start resettling refugees there. But we also resettle refugees in Greeley, Colorado Springs, and Albuquerque. Lutheran Family Services does not just do refugee resettlement. We also do adoption services, foster care, disaster response, which has been active during COVID and now because of the fires that were happening up in the mountains. We do older adult and caregiver services, pregnancy counseling, and some prevention services. If you've ever heard of the Safe Touch programs, those are little presentations that we do in schools to help teach kids about what's safe touching, what is not appropriate, and what they should report. And so our Greeley office only opened in 2008. So it's a newer office, and it actually happened because of JBS meat packaging plants. So JBS used to employ a good amount of workers that were undocumented. And in 2008, ICE actually raided the JBS plants and took away a lot of their workers that didn't have documentation. So as a result, JBS started looking for workers that had the proper documentation, which can be difficult because not a lot of people are willing to do the tough job that JBS offers. So the refugee population really kind of stepped in and filled that role. They are willing to do a hard job, and they really appreciate the income and the stableness that it gives in their lives. So the Somali refugee population started moving into Greeley. They started telling their friends and getting their friends to come and just kind of forming their own little community that all would carpool to work at JBS together. So as a result, refugees started getting resettled here and coming here more often, and our office opened in response to the needed services here in Greeley. So I have got a little bit of vocabulary for you guys. The whole immigration situation can be very confusing. There's a lot of complexities to it. A refugee is the main population that we are dealing with here in Greeley. A refugee means somebody who has been forced to flee their country of origin because of a well-founded fear of persecution due to their race, religion, ethnicity, or their membership of a social group. So if they're part of the LGBTQ community, that could be reason why, or if they're part of a political movement that is not agreed upon by the government, that could be a reason why they're a refugee. A huge portion of refugees are women and children, so it's really these entire families that are being displaced, and they're forced to flee that country. An internally displaced person is very similar to a refugee. They've been forced to flee their homes, but they're still within the boundaries of their home country. So basically they are homeless, forced to flee their city or their town, and just displaced at the moment. They aren't given protection by the United Nations because they have not yet been declared a refugee. An asylee is a governmental name for somebody who has come to the United States and been granted protection in the United States. So they're granted protection for the same reasons that a refugee is declared a refugee. So a well-founded fear of persecution due to race, religion, nationality. But they came to the United States directly and were given legal status directly rather than going through a more indirect route of becoming a refugee first, which has very few legal statuses. And then a couple of more nuanced terms. A Cuban Haitian entrant is treated the same as an asylee in the United States, but they're from Cuba or Haiti. It's just a different governmental law in the US that gives them a different status, but they have all the same rights as an asylee. A special immigrant visa is treated the same as a refugee. They're somebody from Iraq or Afghanistan that helped the United States military during times of conflict, and therefore they will face persecution for helping the US military. So we give them legal status in the United States so that they can move to the US, get refugee assistance, and start their lives here in the US. A victim of trafficking is also a population that we serve in our office. This is actually usually labor trafficking. So they're somebody who was brought to the United States through force or coercion to perform types of labor. So often they can be promised a great job in the United States, but it ends up being more of like a slavery type situation where they're not given freedom, they're not able to leave, and they've been coerced into the situation. So in exchange, the United States give them the ability to stay in exchange for persecuting their trafficker. And finally, a lawful permanent resident is somebody who has been granted permission to live and work in the United States. All of these statuses here become lawful permanent residents after they've been in the US for a certain amount of time. That's anywhere between 1 year and 5 years, depending on which status they are. The words that I have here in bold are bold because they are the statuses that we serve at our LFS office. We cannot serve somebody who has their asylum pending, which means they have an open court case for asylum, and we can't serve anybody who's undocumented. That's just because of our funding source being more governmental funding to pay for people with that legal status. So this is a little picture of our little Greeley office. We are off 11th Avenue and 5th Street, so pretty close to the downtown area. I have a little breakdown of the number of clients that we have served throughout the years. This last year, we have served much fewer clients than normal. That is mostly due to COVID. There was a complete halt of all travel for several months, which really restricted the number of people that we could serve. So you can see that in fiscal year 2018, we served 176 clients. In 2019, we served 146, and then in 2020, only 48. It's also broken down between refugees who we actually pick up from the airport when their flight lands in the United States, and we're that first people that they ever see in the US. Asylees, Cuban entrants, and VOTs, they've been in the US for a little bit already. They've gone through a court case, and then we serve them. They come in as like a walk-in client to our office. And then a secondary arrival would also be considered a walk-in client. That means that somebody was a refugee resettled in another city, and then they came to Greeley and received our resettlement services to help them move to Greeley, basically, to help them get their life started in Greeley. The other aspect to the amount of refugees that we resettle has to do with the United States Refugee Act of 1980. So with that act, it determined that every year at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is in October, the president will consult with Congress, and then they will decide on the number of refugees to be admitted to the US for that year. So they'll decide which populations they want to be admitted and that number. The average before this recent presidency was 95,000 refugees to come to the US. But President Trump has reduced that number a lot. In fiscal year 2018, he set it to 45,000, and then 30,000, and then 18,000. This year, it was set to 15,000 refugees. And as you can see, the numbers have been underneath that. We actually did an amazing job of reaching that exact number in 2019. But in 2020, because of COVID and extreme limitations to that, we were only able to reach 8,500 refugees. In comparison, you can see this number is very small. There are a total of 26 million refugees worldwide. So that's the number of people who have been declared official refugee status through the United Nations. So they have legally presented their reason for fear and have been declared as a refugee. In addition to that number, there are also 45.7 million internally displaced people. So they have not made it outside of their home country, but they have been forced to flee. So that could mean that there is perhaps conflict and like war happening in their hometown. It could mean that people have tried to ethnically cleanse their hometown of people from that ethnicity or people like them, and they are on the run. And then finally, there are 4.2 million asylum seekers worldwide. And so this number comes from people who have arrived in another country and asked for protection from that country. A refugee asks for protection from the United Nations at a refugee camp. And an asylee would be like somebody from South America that comes to the United States and asks for protection here. So the number of people that have built up on the US-Mexican border right now would be considered asylum seekers. That's where the majority of this number is living right now. So that equals a total of 79.5 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. That is more than 1% of the total population. One new person is displaced every 3 seconds. It is a really big deal that we have reached that 1% number. The United Nations just stated that we reached that number in this last year, 1% of the entire population. Which is huge and very, very scary to know that that conflict is forcing that number up. You know, it has been growing for years and years, and it has not been reduced this entire time. So a refugee camp is where a lot of our refugee population in the world lives, and that is where usually refugee status is determined. So when somebody flees their home country, they usually will know about where a refugee camp is and head in that direction. So refugee camps are intended to be a temporary accommodation for people who have been forced to flee their home country. Some people have been in camps for nearly 2 decades. And as a result of that, some camps have started to become almost little towns. So people have started to set up farms and shops and more permanent type housing and kind of their own economic system within those camps because, you know, life has to move on and you have to make do with where you're at. But life in camps is still very difficult. It can be very stagnant and overcrowded. You have little access to education in camps. Most of it is provided by volunteers with the United Nations. There's also inadequate access to food, water, and medical supplies. And this is mostly because this is all run by a nonprofit organization, by the United Nations. countries will donate to the United Nations, UNHCR in particular, so the United Nations High Commission of Refugees. And so the United States donates money towards them to help pay for these refugee camps, but the countries themselves are not directly in charge of them. So they are making do with this type of financial situation. And then lastly, refugees do not have any type of protection from any of these countries. They're considered stateless, so that kind of police protection doesn't exist. We see people that have grown up their whole lives in refugee camps when they come to us, especially when we're getting a young adult, so somebody who's 21, 24, 25, they will have spent their entire life in a refugee camp and grown up there, which is a very unique experience. We get people who have had up to a second grade education, and we get people who have almost had entire high school type educations and have learned English in refugee camps. So it kind of depends on how established their refugee camp was and how much support they were able to get there. Sometimes they might be better off than somebody who fled more recently their home country and didn't get to grow up in a refugee camp. It all kind of depends. Okay, here's a little map of the top source countries of refugees. This means the countries that are producing the most amount of refugees. They include Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar, which is also known as Burma. And they produce 68% of the refugees. So I mapped it out a little bit for you guys to be able to visualize this. The ones in red are the highest producers of refugees. The ones in blue are the ones that the United States are resettling, or sorry, the ones that Greeley is resettling the most. So that means that Greeley already has this type of population in here, and it's driving us to resettle more of that same population so they can kind of have that social support. The United States does not resettle exactly the same countries that produce the most refugees. That's because the president also determines what countries and for what reasons he wants to resettle refugees for. And so I believe that recently we've decided to resettle refugees who are fleeing religious persecution as a main priority. And there have also been travel bans on countries that produce refugees, right? So Syria is a huge one that has experienced a travel ban under this most recent presidency. And that's because there is a presence of ISIS in the country. And so it's fear of that kind of presence. But it's also important to note that refugees are highly screened for that thing before they come to the US. So the top host countries mean the countries that are taking care of the most refugees, that are housing refugees, they're living in that country. That would be Turkey, Colombia, Pakistan, Uganda, and Germany. So most of these are still developing countries, and they are in the neighboring countries. So that means that the countries that are right next to the countries that are producing refugees really bear most of the burden of the conflict in their neighboring countries. Because we are the United States and we have a lot of area and we get to be separated from all of this conflict happening over there, we kind of don't see as much of the problem here, and we get to kind of feel like it's not in existence. All right, so this next little section is going to talk about how a refugee ends up coming to Greeley, Colorado, and what that journey is like, and then how we can help the refugees that have made it here. So again, it starts with conflict or persecution. A refugee flees their home country, and then they arrive in a neighboring country. They apply for refugee status with the United Nations, and then they can be declared a refugee and allowed to live in that refugee camp. It can take 2 to 3 years to officially be declared a refugee. But once they get that, they're documented by the United Nations, and then they can apply for third country resettlement. This is a very slim chances type of program. Only 1% of refugees end up being resettled to a third country just because of the sheer number of refugees out there, and the number of countries that resettle refugees are limited. So it includes the United States, Canada, the European Union resettles some refugees, and then Australia, New Zealand. And I think that's the majority of it. So specifically, they'll basically apply for any type of resettlement, and then they'll be referred to one of the countries that resettles refugees. If they're referred to the United States, they'll start the security screening for the United States, which is the most intense of any of the country's security screenings. Our screening takes 2 or more years, and it goes through 5 federal agencies. This is a little diagram of this screening. We won't go through it all. But the main point about this is that it screens all of the information of the candidate through the National Counterterrorism Center, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the State Department. What they're looking for is to see if they are a security risk to our country, if they're connected to bad actors, and then if they have any outstanding warrants or criminal violations. After they've been screened through all of our systems, then they're interviewed by USCIS officials to see if they would be a good candidate for resettlement, to see if they do have any of those suspicious characteristics, and yeah, basically to see if they would be successful here in the US. And then their fingerprints are collected. Those fingerprints are screened as well. If they pass all of that, they get approved to the United States, and then they get referred to a resettlement agency. So we are that resettlement agency. We're under Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. This is all 9 resettlement agencies in the United States. Lutheran Family Services is the only agency that operates outside of Denver in Colorado, but Denver also is home to ECDC and International Rescue Committee. Once they get approved, the resettlement agency helps them complete their health screening, their cultural orientation, and their travel documents while they're still in the country that they fled to. So this happens overseas. They get a little cultural orientation that kind of talks about what to expect when they come to the United States. We still get people that have heard rumors and crazy things and a lot of misinformation about what the United States is like. So we have to kind of give our own cultural orientation, dispel those rumors as well. But I find this little IOM logo in the top right of your screen to be really symbolic to the entire refugee resettlement process. We do pick up refugees after they've gone through the days of traveling to make it to the United States from the airport. Our case managers are allowed to enter into the airport and be standing there waiting for them once they get off the plane, along with any family members that are already in the US. And the way that we know that they are our client is they're holding a little plastic bag that has this IOM logo on it. And then we kind of just chase them down and say, hey, I'm your case manager. I'm here to take care of you. And we drive them home to their new home. It's a very, very fun and exciting process. Greeley is a little bit unique. There's a rule that Greeley will only accept refugees if they have a family tie already in Greeley. So that means somebody is willing to sign for them and say that they're going to help them out in their process. It's not a huge commitment, but they do help on the first day that a family arrives. They prepare a hot and ready meal that is ethnically appropriate. So it's not American food. It's food that will agree with their stomach and be edible to them. The family tie will also help with showing people how to go to the grocery store, helping them start bank accounts, a lot of those little tiny things that you don't realize are important to understand. So all refugees that come to the United States go through the United States Refugee Program. In this program, they're expected to go to English classes. They're expected to find employment within 3 to 6 months. And if we help them find employment, they're expected to take that employment. And then everybody gets a travel loan. It's about $1,000 per person in the family. And once they get employment, they go on a payment plan to repay this travel loan. Lutheran Family Services, we provide kind of that holistic, well-rounded services that everybody needs to start their lives in the United States, which is a lot of things. So it starts with airport pickup. We provide housing and furnishings. So we actually meet with the landlord before they arrive, get their rental documents all signed, and we rent out their apartment for them. We provide furnishing and set up their apartment so that it'll be ready for their first sleep in the United States. We help them obtain their identity documents, so their social security cards, their Colorado state IDs, their permission to work cards. We help them set up with medical screenings. So Sunrise Monfort Family Clinic actually handles all refugee medical screenings, which is this very intensive medical orientation. And screening process that all refugees go to once they arrive. We do cash assistance in our office and benefits enrollment with food stamps and Medicaid. We refer out to community resources, so that includes English classes, school programs, Soccer Without Border programs. We'll do a cultural orientation in our office, so basically little lessons on how to ride the bus, when to call 911, when to go to the hospital, or when to treat it yourself. A lot of those little things, like how to use your oven, not to store paper in your oven, things like that, that somebody who's never lived in an American house would never know. We do employment services, so helping with job applications, resumes, interview translation. We do youth and school programs. So our kids that enroll in the schools here, we have school navigators that help them make sure that they're communicating with their teachers, that they know what the teacher expects and they are able to maintain their grades. We'll do volunteer mentors. So those are volunteers in the community that get paired up with newly arrived refugee families to help them get adjusted. We'll do intensive case management. So if anybody's dealing with domestic violence or drug addiction or childhood trauma, in there an array of things. We do have a specialized family case manager that will help with the really, really tough cases. And then finally, we do donations. And so we collect winter coats for our newly arrived families or angel tree Christmas gifts, things like that. Our office is allowed to serve anybody who has arrived within 5 years to the United States. So from the moment that they come into the US to 5 years, they can find their services through us. If they're an asylee, it's the moment that their status is declared asylum. Then they have 5 years to receive services from us. So we don't just help for that initial placement. If they move or if they find themselves in a tough situation, we're here for them as well.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Do the other agencies that you identified, do they have similar type of assistance?
Yes. All of the agencies that are resettlement agencies do the same thing that we do. It's almost exactly the same. It's all regulated through the US government. There's particular items that we have to check off and forms that we have to fill. So every client gets that social security card, they get on Medicaid, all of those things. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, very much.
Okay, awesome. So another thing that all of our resettlement offices do is cash assistance. So there is a cash assistance program that is refugee specific, and it's to fulfill a gap in the United States welfare system. So at the moment, a single person with no family cannot get a monthly financial assistance if they don't have any finances. So refugee cash assistance is for our single clients when they first arrive in the US before they've had a chance to get a job. So it's just a monthly income to help them pay for rent, maybe to help them buy a couple things of clothing or a couple items of food to get started in the US. It's about $600 per month per person. And it's really only our single clients that get this. Once they get a job, they get off of it and they start living their life on their own. Every other client also starts with financial assistance monthly. So if they're a family, they get on TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. This is through the United States Human Services welfare system. So any family in the US is eligible for TANF, and it's just that monthly assistance to help them pay for what they need before they get a job and start supporting themselves. In addition to that monthly cash assistance, all of our clients get on food stamps immediately, which is, an EBT card that helps them pay for food at the grocery store. They go on Medicaid as well, which is, to cover their medical assistance, anything before they get on their job sponsored medical benefits. Other things that people can use include sleep. So that means energy assistance in their household, WIC, which is women, infants, and children. So helping with your nutrition for moms and babies. And then CCAP, which is help with childcare for people who are searching for a job. The final one that I have not mentioned yet is called reception and placement. And that's actually the money that we use to rent out apartments for newly arrived refugees. All of the ones that I mentioned previously are available to asylees, victims of trafficking, all of the clients that we serve. but reception and placement is only available to a refugee who arrives directly to our office. So we use that money to rent, pay their first month's rent, pay their deposit, and then help pay for the household items that we provide if they weren't donated by the community. Okay, one huge thing that I like to talk about is cultural competency. And this is something that everybody can use when they're interacting with anybody from a different culture in their community. It's the ability to understand, communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. And there's four main things to keep in mind when you're trying to exercise cultural competency. The first one is to be aware that you harbor biases and to be aware that you might have a reaction to somebody based on their culture. It's an attitude to be curious about somebody's culture rather than judgmental about it. It's a knowledge to understand that even though you might be aware of trying not to be culturally biased, you still might act in ways that is culturally biased. And then finally, it's skills. And so it means that you're practicing your cultural competency every time that you interact with somebody of a different culture. You're looking back on that interaction and saying, did I do that well? Is there any way I could improve that interaction to be more accepting of their culture rather than judgmental of their culture? And so the main issue with cultural competency is to remember that people come from a different culture than you. And some of the things that they do are not a personality trait. It is a cultural difference between you and them. And so it doesn't mean that they're lazy. It doesn't mean that they're disrespectful. It's just what they have learned to expect from their culture. So I have a little breakdown of what our Western culture is like and what a lot of the cultures that we'll see from the refugee population is like. So the first one is us Americans. We really are focused on individual winning and getting our education and really pushing ourselves up in that ladder in society. And a lot of our refugee cultures don't have that same ideal. They more care about communal harmony or family harmony and succeeding as a family rather than an individual. We're very time oriented in the United States. So we are very punctual here. And a lot of our refugee populations are not as punctual, and they'll spend a lot more time interacting with people if they're there rather than trying to get on to their next meeting. That can often be interpreted as rude, when in reality, they feel like they're being more respectful by honoring the people that were there rather than the time. We have respect for earned status. A lot of other people have respect for elders, hierarchy, or maybe even more respect for males in their culture. We see our success as material, and other cultures can see it more spiritual, which means they could also go inside themselves to solve a problem rather than trying to look outwardly for that problem. Another thing to keep in mind is that we have a Christian and a science base, which means we believe in a beginning and an end. And then a lot of the countries come from Buddhism, Hindu, Islam types of thought, and they believe in an eternal reoccurrence, and they believe in more types of like meditation and searching inside oneself. Another thing to remember is that hand signals are different between cultures. So a thumbs up or an okay might not mean the same thing in other cultures as it does at the US. The other aspect that I like to talk about is trauma-informed care. So anybody who is a refugee has been through some sort of trauma, whether it's coming to the United States from your refugee camp, or it's fleeing your home country, seeing war happen in front of you, or losing a loved one. A lot of our clients have been through trauma. We don't ask what that trauma is, but we assume that they have trauma, and we try not to cause re-traumatization. We have 5 guiding principles to trauma-informed care. The first one is safety. So we're respecting our clients' privacy, and we're being welcoming. We're making sure that they feel safe and that they feel invited to come into our common area. Choice is a huge one. And so we're very clear when we're speaking to somebody. We make sure that we use translators so that everything is completely understood. And we give people the ability to have choice and control over their own services, because that's something that they might not have had before in the past. Collaboration along a similar line, we're making decisions with them, not for them. Trustworthiness. So again, we're clear, we're concise, we have boundaries, and we maintain those boundaries consistently. And then empowerment. So we're providing validation and affirmation to our clients, and we're prioritizing that they build their skills in the United States. And so skill building can include learning to ride the bus, learning to go to the grocery store and check out with a cashier, those kind of actions that make them feel more empowered to do stuff on their own and be successful here in the United States. I have a little blurb about re-traumatization here. We can re-traumatize both in the system. So that could be at Lutheran Family Services, that could be at their doctor's offices, and within our own relationships when you're interacting one-on-one with a refugee or with an immigrant. So in the system, people can experience re-traumatization when they're having to retell their story over and over again. If they're treated as a number, or when procedures require them to undress. They're seen as their label. For example, if you say, this is my refugee friend, and label them as a refugee, that is re-traumatizing because it's taking value away from them as a person. If they aren't given choices, they can be re-traumatized. And then if they're not given the opportunity to give feedback and give their own input, that can be re-traumatizing. Relationally, not being seen or heard, it's super important to listen to them. Even if you guys have a language barrier, trying your best to understand what they want and need is very, very important. Maintaining trust is important. Being collaborative, like I said, is important. Make sure that you're not doing things for other people, that you're doing them alongside them or with them. Yeah, and then just using proper language, not being oppressive with your language is super important as well. So as far as what you can do here in Greeley to help our refugees, we do have some volunteer opportunities, but I don't want to glance over what you can do just in your day-to-day life real fast. In your day-to-day life, if you see somebody of another culture than you, be a smile and a wave is huge. Showing our new refugee clients that we are a welcoming society and that they aren't outsiders is so important. If you ask any of our clients what made them finally feel okay in the US, it's because they had white people, white Americans, people that were obviously American, being nice to them and being accepting and showing that they were welcome here. And so smiling, waving, having a conversation, helping them at the grocery store or at the bus stop is a huge thing that you can do to make a difference. And it doesn't even involve a time commitment or money or anything like that. If you did want to spend time with our refugee population and get involved volunteering, we have a couple of volunteer roles at our office. The first one is called cultural mentoring. It's a 6-month relationship where you get paired with a newly arrived family and you kind of just grow a friendship. It's very, very free and it's very much on your own. You are doing a cultural exchange where you're sharing American culture and you're getting to learn about their culture. And it's just super, super fun, super rewarding. And you get to see a lot about what that resettlement process is like. We also do move-in volunteers. And so each time we get a little notification to our email inbox that says a flight has been scheduled for your new family. Once we get that email, we reach out to apartment managers and we say, hey, we need an apartment for 2 bedrooms. We get it rented out. And then I send out an email to our volunteers and I say, we're doing a move-in on Friday at 2:00. Meet me at the storage unit. And so our volunteers will come meet me. We will unpack our storage unit into the truck, take our truck over to the new apartment and set up the apartment for the newly arrived family. So it's just a fun time where we all get to relax a little bit, be a little bit active and get an apartment ready to be a welcoming thing for our new families. We also do office volunteers or interns. This has been stifled a little bit due to COVID, but we use interns for quality assurance, for case management help, and a lot of interns help with employment coaching. So helping people get past that first job at JBS to maybe a more rewarding job later on. Finally, we do transportation volunteers. This is also on hold at the moment, but we will be starting up again once it is safe to do so. A transportation volunteer helps our new families get around the city. Mostly this is to health appointments. Each family gets 2 or 3 health appointments that they need help getting to. But it also can be to enroll in English classes or to go to a tuberculosis appointment for the first time. So getting around the city, it's a chance to be a little bit less committed than a cultural mentor, but you get to have a one-on-one relationship with a client and kind of just have a conversation and interactions, and you can have a lot of fun just with that little 10-minute conversation on your way to Sunrise Community Health as well. So I just have a little blurb here about the cultural mentoring program because it's the absolute most fun thing that you can do here at LFS. We usually use teams of 2 to 4 people. We ask for a 6-month commitment, and then we ask that you hang out with a family once a week or once every other week. You will be given the phone number of that family and you will be able to communicate with them yourself. Usually through text messages, our clients are able to communicate in English enough to decide on a time for you to come visit them. At that point, you can do whatever activity you want. We decide what activities you'll like to do on the first meeting with a translator. And then after that, you guys will kind of communicate on your own about what you're going to do. Some things that our culture mentors do is, biggest one is cooking and eating together. So a lot of our families will take turns cooking for each other. The first week, the American mentors will cook an American meal. The next week, maybe the Burmese refugees will show them a meal traditionally from Burma. So you kind of get to do that really fun cultural exchange, and then sharing in a meal together is bonding as ever. Another thing we love to do is take pictures together, print up those pictures, bring them to your next meeting with the family. Going to sporting events or going to the park and taking the kids to play soccer is another fun one. And then all of our families love to learn. And so practicing English with the families is a huge activity, or practicing job interviews, or even how to clean the house, because that can be a very daunting task for newly arrived refugee. We also take donations at Lutheran Family Services. A big one is diapers. We're always trying to provide diapers to our families with kids who are on TANF, so temporary assistance for needy families. We also, like I said, we set up entire apartments for families before they arrive. So a lot of these things listed here are part of those items that we need to provide for our new families. And so one of those things being an alarm clock, pillows, blankets, towels, sets of pots and pans are huge and very, very helpful. We also do winter coats. Right now, we're trying to do a winter coat gift card drive for our families. Mostly because of COVID, we're not trying to collect used winter coats and have families coming into the office to pick out their coats. Instead, we are distributing gift cards to families that don't yet have winter gear so that they can go buy that winter gear. We also take used furniture, and if you're in the Greeley area, we will do a pickup for that furniture. It depends on what items we have in our storage unit at the moment and how much space we have in our storage unit on if we will pick up that item. But our most needed things are couches, kitchen tables, kitchen chairs, and then dressers for clothes. We also do financial donations at lfsrm.org. And the biggest thing that I ask everybody to do, like I said earlier, is smile at people of other cultures, wave at them, say hi to them when you see them around. Just be a welcoming force all the time. So that's all the information that I have for you. I'd love to chat about it a little bit more. But my email is right here. It's alex.clowen@lfsrm.org. And if you guys want to get more involved, if you have questions, if you want to be put on our email list, you can reach out to me right there. You can also find our volunteer orientations on www.lfsrm.org as well. Okay. All right. How does everybody feel about the information they learned? Is it clear?
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It was a lot and it was really clear. I have a couple of questions and I want to hear from you all too, but I first just wanted to make sure you all noticed, if I haven't told you before, I think I've said this to some of you, that the Episcopal Church is one of those refugee settling agencies. We have Episcopal Migration Ministries. They're not active in Colorado, but in other places where they are settling people. I know they settle folks in Kentucky. I don't know if there are other places too, but there are Episcopal churches where Episcopal Migration Ministries is active doing a lot of work with refugees. So it is a really, it's a key priority for the National Episcopal Church, just so you know. And we're really good, close cousins with the Lutherans.
Yeah.
So we're in full communion. Our bishops are in cahoots all the time. And there are a lot of clergy people who work between Episcopal and Lutheran, ELCA Lutheran churches. So just so you know, we have a very strong relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for talking with us. It was very interesting and informative, and I'm an ESL teacher. I lived in Brazil for 20 years, so I kind of know a lot about living in
Yeah.
another culture and, relating to people from other places. And it's everything you say is very meaningful.
Mhm.
And I certainly appreciate your, giving us an overview of what you do. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. What a unique perspective to have taught in Brazil. That's so amazing. And I know I had a lot of information, so it's probably hard to take it all in one moment, but it is a good overview of everything that's happening out there.
How many individuals do you have right now that you're working with over there?
Now we're working with right now. I would say that we probably have around 50 active clients. And so that means that we are helping them on their job hunt, helping them have secure housing or care for their kids or something like that.
So you don't have any really new ones then at the present time?
We do have a fairly new family. I think recently a family of 4 arrived, probably about a month ago. Yeah, we wish we had newly arriving families. We had a family scheduled for, I think, a week from today, and their flight got canceled, and we don't know why. So it's very, very sad. We have a lot of clients who have half of their family still in the refugee camp with the promise that they're going to come soon. So the hope is that we can resettle as many refugees so that their family members can come and they can be reunited with them in a safe and secure place where they can actually build a home, which is one of the huge reasons why we advocate for refugee resettlement, so that their lives can unpause and that they can grow and stop feeling incomplete.
So that would be an example of some of the individuals you said that had to have someone in the United States that could sponsor them. Is that?
Yeah, and so it's a family tie, which means that they're more likely to come to the US when they apply for refugee resettlement. Yeah, and so, I mean, we've had so many amazing cases of family ties coming. The most recent one that really sticks out to me is we had a elderly mom and her 2 adult sons come to the US about a year and a half ago. And that son was actually engaged to somebody from his refugee camp who came about 6 months later. And so he came to the airport with us when we picked her up and the rest of her family. And we got to witness their reunion at the airport. And that is just some of the most chilling and beautiful and tear-jerking times. Yeah.
Is there an opportunity for them to get citizenship then through your program?
Yeah, there is. So the legal process is that you have refugee status for 1 year. After that, you apply for your green card, which is you pretty much automatically will be awarded a green card if you were a refugee first. But you have to complete the application, show that you've completed all of the medical requirements, and then you get a green card soon. After that, you can hold your green card for 10 years. Once it's been 10 years, you apply for citizen status if you feel up for it, which involves taking the citizenship test. There is classes at the Immigrant and Refugee Center in Greeley. They do our English classes and they also do citizenship classes. And so helping you prepare to take that citizenship class. And they'll do a little award ceremony after you get it to kind of just celebrate the fact that you've earned your citizenship in the United States. And it is a really big achievement and big moment for our clients.
And if you said they can choose to get citizenship, but then after 10 years, what happens if they choose not to? Does their green card get renewed?
Yeah, you could renew your green card instead. Usually our clients who are a little bit more elderly don't feel like they could pass the citizenship test, and that's when they might renew their green card instead.
Okay.
Has it always been 10 years? Take them 10 years to do that?
I think so. I couldn't say. I'm not sure if you're like a regular visa holder, if it's 10 years as well, but
no, it's quite a bit less than that.
It is?
It used to be 3 years.
Oh, wow.
I think it's now maybe 5 years.
Mm-hmm. But for anybody with protected status, like refugee or asylee, it's 10.
With a green card, I think it's a green card and 3 years.
Mhm.
Although my relatives never got a green card. They got a refugee parole. And
Wow.
no, and that went straight to citizenship.
What
So
country were they from?
I'm going back 45 years.
Yeah. That's very, very interesting though. From where?
Vietnam.
From Vietnam. Wow. Yep.
My wife is a true Miss Saigon.
Wow. Very, very interesting. Yeah, we have such a history of refugees, from Jewish refugees to Vietnamese refugees. You can literally see every single conflict that has happened in America reflected in the refugee immigration that has happened to the US, which makes America very culturally amazing to be able to be a savior for all those areas.
It strengthens our country amazingly.
Well,
Yeah.
we started some
Okay.
of those wars. I'm sorry.
We did. You're right. You're right.
My
It's,
husband-
yeah, it's not quite as simple and clear as we wish it was.
Yeah, right, really. My husband is just a plain old immigrant, and I think it took him 3 years to get be able to apply for a green card, or maybe 5. I can't remember. It's been a long time.
Mhm. That makes sense. Yeah, it's different depending on that protected status or regular immigration.
Of course, right.
Loan and Phelan got their green or their citizenship in a little less than 3 years of being in the country,
Wow.
primarily because we were heading back overseas on a U.S. assignment.
Oh,
So what are the opportunities for these people when they come here as far as getting jobs and things like that? I know a lot of them work at the meat packing plant, and I actually toured one of those when I worked in the grocery business. It's pretty disgusting. I know I wouldn't want to work there.
my office has toured it, but I was not able to go on that day. I had to be absent. But most of our clients do work at JBS as their first job in the United States. The Greeley population that tends to resettle here actually ends up being a little bit less educated than the sum of all refugees, like the average education level of all refugees coming to the US. And that is because the meat packaging community is more appropriate for people with less education, because it supplies a job that is well paying and can support a family if you didn't get that education. We have a lot of clients that only had second grade or third grade education before they had to flee their country, or because they were of an ethnicity that public schools would not serve, something like that. So it is the common talk amongst the communities here that they approve of working at JBS and that they will support each other to work at JBS. And so that includes carpooling to work or helping them talk to each other's managers. And I think it's kind of this comfort level of knowing my community works here. I will not be alone at JBS. So it is a support network that happens a lot. We do a lot of work in trying to encourage our clients to find the next thing. A lot of clients end up working at Otterbox in Fort Collins, which is kind of a more comfortable job rather than the hot or cold and stinky environment of JBS. We also have clients working in other types of production. So we had a organic foods company in Fort Collins, and then we also have the dairy over here in Greeley as well. But after that, they can work in any type of job. So we have a lot of younger refugees who go to school for nursing. We have a couple accountants. Recently, I've been getting a lot of asylees, which means somebody who came to the US on their own. And we've had asylees with doctoral degrees recently, which is crazy. So we're seeing it all over the place, from professional jobs to a lot of JBS or production jobs.
Does your educational effort help them get GEDs?
Yeah, we have had a little bit of trouble with the funding for that in Greeley. The biggest one is we start with ESL. Once they feel comfortable with their GED, they can go to Ames Community College, and it's relatively cheap to take GED classes there.
Because a GED is sort of the minimum educational accepted level to get out of any type of menial
And no
operation?
refugee coming to the US has that because of the documentation to prove that you have a high school education is nobody's coming with that type of documentation. So yeah, a lot of people try to get their GED.
Would you say that most of them work on the GED, or are they mostly just working and don't feel like
It really
educated?
depends. It depends on how old they are when they come. And so we have a lot of clients that are already families, like parents who just want to be able to support their family and pay for their family. And so they might decide to work at JBS for the rest of their life. The starting wage at JBS is $18 an hour right now, that which has been raised up from about $16 an hour pre-COVID. And then they get raises along the path of JBS work. And so we've seen clients come in with a pay stub that was $22 an hour before COVID. So it's probably $24, $25 an hour now, which is not the most amazing wage, but it is enough for them to raise a family, which is amazing. But anybody who comes like in their 20s usually ends up getting a GED.
Do the most of your clients over there, do they tend to live in the same general area, kind of in a group?
That's a good question. Especially in Greeley. Greeley is very segregated based on income. And so you can see East Greeley is all low income refugee or immigrant populations. And then West Greeley barely has any. So I would say that is a tendency all around the United States that they will live in closer communities like apartment complexes that are mostly Somali or mostly Burmese because they rely on each other for transportation, interpretation, and just for like social support and community. So they do live in the same apartment complexes or in similar areas, partially because of the structure of Greeley and partially for that support.
What is the relationship like with the city of Greeley and Weld County in general?
Of refugees to the city?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the relationship is pretty good. I think that a lot of the city officials in Greeley are very progressive and very caring about the entire population of Greeley. And I don't think that refugees are quite as, as much of a focus for them as it is for me. But I think poverty and inequality is a huge focus in Greeley among the school district and among, for example, the Parks and Recreation Department is making a huge effort to make natural areas a 10-minute walk from anybody in the city of Greeley. So they're making a huge effort to put natural areas and parks and trails in the low-income communities as well as the upper-income communities. So I really approve of what the city of Greeley is doing for our populations. There has been a little bit of pushback against the resettlement of refugees in the community from maybe the entire Weld County, but we haven't seen it as much from the city of Greeley specifically. It is tough to navigate conversation about.
How do the refugees that work over here in Fort Collins come over? Do they have a common come over on a common bus or something like that?
So it will usually be one refugee who has a car, has already obtained their license and transportation, will take their friends with them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's just that carpool, everybody coming in together.
Is there any refugee communities here in Fort Collins?
There are smaller refugee communities in Fort Collins. There are more asylees in Fort Collins than there are refugees. So I've seen asylees from Russia and from Venezuela living in Fort Collins as well. So I would say there's probably less of like the Somali and Burmese populations, but there are people with that protected status over there.
Has anybody here read the book by Helen Thorpe called The Newcomers? Oh, it's wonderful. You should read it.
Yeah.
So it's talking about these same issues and about helping people to become settled in the United States. And specifically, it focuses on a high school in Denver. And people from all over the world that are in an English class. So yeah, I highly recommend it. It's called The Newcomers. The author is Helen Thorpe, who was a former First Lady of Colorado. She's the ex-wife.
Helen Thorpe has visited Greeley before, and she's done a book talk in Greeley before.
Ah, that's great.
Yeah, she's very nice.
Sure. Yes.
Mhm.
Are there any religious communities in or around Greeley that are very active with you all and doing an exemplary job of engaging with refugees and asylees?
Yeah, there are. There are some religious communities. I would say Redeemer Lutheran Church and First Congregational Church are the most actively supportive of Lutheran Family Services and the efforts that we are doing in supporting our efforts. There are a couple of other churches that are that actually have refugee attendees and are supportive of the refugee population in that way. And I wouldn't know the name of them as much. I just know that they exist and that they're doing great work out there as well.
How about the Catholic Church?
I have not had much interaction of the Catholic Church to Lutheran Family Services directly, but I'm not sure about their involvement within the actual community.
Because the Vietnamese refugees were settled largely through Catholic charities.
Yeah, Catholic Charities resettles refugees as well. They also have a huge heart for homelessness, and I think a lot of their efforts are concentrated on that.
You know, a lot of, particularly those coming out of Venezuela, are probably Catholic.
Yes. Yeah. And that's also interesting because we do have a lot of Catholic people in Greeley, but a lot of them have not received asylum status yet. And so they wouldn't be involved in our office, but they would be immigrants who have gone through the same things that our refugees have. So that'd be basically anybody who speaks Spanish. A majority of them have not gained status that is a protected status. So they might have a visa or something like that, but they're not given asylum. A lot of them are banned or blocked from getting asylum status.
How big is the undocumented population, do you think, in the area?
I could not answer it. I have no idea, to be honest.
You said a lot of them got, ICE had, gone to the plant and everything. And did those people get sent away, or what about their families? And yeah.
So that's actually a huge tragedy in the city, was that 2008 ICE raids. They took the husbands of the families and they deported them mostly. The families, the wives and the children were not deported. They were left here in the US without a breadwinner anymore. So they were put in very, very hard situations. And when you're undocumented, you cannot get food stamps, Medicaid, or financial assistance. And you can hardly get any type of rental assistance. Nobody is given funding to help undocumented people. It's very, very hard. And that's why we can't get it either. At JBS, they no longer will employ anybody who's not documented. So every single person there has the papers, and that's the case for a lot of the production jobs in Greeley. I would say anybody who's undocumented is more likely to be working on a farm in a more less official type of job.
Pretty sad situation, isn't it?
Yeah. I took a deep dive into the newspaper articles from the time, and I saw some very sad videos and protests and stuff like that.
Long time ago, I talked to a onion farmer out in Montrose, and his crew went on strike on him just at harvest time.
Yeah.
And he had to hire another crew immediately, was unable to check their documentation, and ended up with a $30,000 fine. And as far as I know, they were legal there. He just couldn't verify it.
Wow.
I didn't know that was a thing.
So
That's
farmers
crazy.
are a little bit reluctant. This is where all your employment agencies come in, because then the laborers hired by the employment agency, and they can check them and then share them out.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that that happened.
So I'm not sure that farmers are going to be terribly interested.
Yeah.
The type of labor you get through a labor employer place like that is,
Really?
I speak from experience.
Yeah.
Some of them are like on parole and wearing ankle bracelets, and they're
There's so much to learn.
yeah. Anyway,
Let
it's
me ask another question, and then going back to my own experience here. I noticed in your presentation that the sponsorship and things like that, or the social services, were being carried out primarily by Lutheran services, and not by individuals. Whereas in the Vietnamese case, they were basically sponsored by individual people. And
Yeah.
that sponsorship to me was something a little bit well-intentioned, but not necessary, but became an effective problem.
Okay.
My family was resettled by a 26-year-old dairy farmer in Painesville, Minnesota.
Wow.
How much further from Saigon can you get to Painesville?
Yeah.
But he didn't have the managerial skills to really put together a good program, and they left within a year.
Yep.
He assisted
Yeah.
them. They ended up going to St. Cloud State University, and eventually all of them got degrees, and then disappeared into corporate America.
Yep. Well, that is a perhaps outdated approach to resettlement.
I
In
hope
the
it's
time-
outdated.
Yeah. In the time that I've been working in resettlement or even researching resettlement, it has not been a practice. And I don't know when we switched away from that sponsorship mentality to, I don't know what we would call this new program, but we no longer look to
Well, it's an
have people
NGO.
house
It would
families.
be an NGO monitored sponsorship
Yeah. Yep.
rather than an individual. It'd be
It'd be organizational.
organization.
I had a question about internally displaced people.
Yeah.
Are these people like in the United States internally displaced where?
In the countries that are creating refugees.
Okay.
So Syria, Burma, yeah, countries with conflict.
Okay, so what is the difference between an internally displaced person and an actual refugee?
So an
That's the
actual
border.
refugee has been declared a refugee by the United Nations. So they had to apply for that status.
Okay,
An internally displaced person has not yet had contact with the United Nations.
okay, but they would be eligible to apply for refugee status?
If they were able to leave their home country.
Uh-huh.
They can't do that until they've been able to leave.
So are they still, that's my question, I guess. Where are they? Are they here?
So no. So they are still in their home country. They're just not in their city, perhaps. Yeah. Basically, they had to flee their home, and they might be on the process out of their home country, but they're not yet escaped.
Okay, but so then where does Lutheran Family Services come in with those people if they're still?
We don't.
Okay,
And the United Nations does not either. They are the least protected people in the world.
yeah.
Internally displaced.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a good call out. That's the conclusion.
It would seem that it might be quite difficult to get accepted into a program anywhere, wouldn't it?
To a refugee program?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. You have to be very lucky, right? So when you are in a refugee camp and you fled your country, your options are to return to your home country, to stay in that camp, or to be one of the 1% that gets resettled. So you have to be very lucky. Yeah.
It's a pretty sad situation in itself.
Yeah. And it's a lot of people out there.
Is there much that anyone or any country could do to change that?
I mean, my hope would be that the United States gets better at not causing problems and that other countries get better at not causing problems, and that we can maybe form more peace within country to country relationships. And then that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is racism and ethnic cleansing and cleansing of people of the LGBTQ population. And that's a whole nother issue that is cultural, and I wouldn't even know where to tackle that problem, right? But you hope that in time people grow up and, and the world learns a little bit. But we've had a long time already.
You're very gracious in the way you put that.
Yes.
It is a tough
Yeah.
situation.
We did a series on racism and immigration and everything last fall, and one of the things that was brought out in this one movie was the North American Free Trade Agreement, and that we made with Mexico and Canada. And before that even went into law or agreement or whatever, the United States, we did this huge study on what would be the outcome of some of these, this trade agreement in that. And they said, you will see a huge influx of immigration or people trying to get in from Mexico and that, because we pretty much devastated their like farming industry, their corn industry and everything with that trade agreement. And so they knew this was going to happen before that even went into law, that it was going to devastate the Mexican agricultural industry, and we would see a huge influx of people trying to get into the United States.
Yeah.
And we knew that going into it.
And here we are dealing with it.
And here we are, exactly.
Yeah. Wow, I hadn't heard that one before. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I know about that.
Yeah.
You know, Congress needs to come up with a coherent immigration system. I think. I believe that we can do better than what we're doing.
That is a huge issue right there. It's so hard to be an immigrant.
Misnomenclature.
What did you say?
I said, isn't coherence in Congress a misnomenclature?
I guess so.
I noticed that you didn't speak of very many refugees from Africa, and I would think there would be a tremendous number from there.
There are. Yeah, you're right. There are a tremendous number. From North Central Africa, we have a lot of refugees in the Horn of Africa, a lot from the Middle East, and then just one country in East Asia is a huge contributor of the Asian refugee population, and that's Burma. Yeah, but Africa is, yeah, you're right. Big one. It was amazing talking to you guys. You're so contributing in great ways.
I'm just mindful of the time. And I know some folks are going to return for Compline in a little over an hour, which is pretty soon. But, you know, these conversations are big conversations, and I think that they directly connect to our faith in so many different ways. There's so many different places in Scripture where God's people are on the move, fleeing. Jesus himself became a refugee just after birth, when he was fleeing Herod. And of course, had no room at the inn when he was born. And you all know that story and know about Jesus being born in a manger. So I just think that, there's so many things in our scriptures and in our Christian tradition that call us to look at these issues and have a voice. And I think, there's been many conversations in St. Luke's that are leading us somewhere with this. So sit with that and pray over that and think about, what our role is. We probably can't fix the entire world, but there are things that we can do to welcome people, to be loving in this community, the couple of slides that you had on what I don't remember what you called it, cultural competency, I think is what you called it.
Yep.
That fits so much in with the conversations we've been having about race and crossing the lynching tree and, you know, being aware of our own biases over the last few months. So just pray over it. And Alex, thank you for this presentation. And we will all keep talking about this.
Me.
This is only the beginning of conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, it was great to meet everyone. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you
everybody
very
for
much.
coming.